Thank you very much for inviting me. First, I have to apologize because I just arrived this afternoon and I hate doing this. I think this is very rude, but I also hate not doing my teaching, which I had to do yesterday evening, so I flew in today. So that's the reason why I just arrived in the afternoon. I'm not a computer scientist, I'm not a cartographer, although I'm a geographer. I'm a social and cultural geographer of the city. So I'm interested in, and Olga just said that, I'm interested in urban policies, how they circulate globally. And this is my take on smart urbanism, so not interested so much in data and technology, you will see that. So I will be talking, that's my interest, so how this discourse, this policy becomes a global policy. How it circulates, does it circulate actually? That's one of the questions. The other thing I'm doing right now is working on geographies of mental health. So I'm working on the relations between cities and psychosis, which is seems very far away, but if I'm not too long, I might show that there might be some connections. Actually, the work I'm doing right now is very much about working with patients, working with their experience of the city to better understand the influence of urban living on the onset of schizophrenia. So the advantage or disadvantage of coming late is also that many things have been said, so I will certainly be very redundant with things that have been said concerning smart urbanism. Maybe the first thing I want to say is that I think probably you all know by now what smart urbanism is, but at the same time, I think nobody really does know what it means, because it's such a very debated term, very debated concept, and it's there's loads of different definitions within academia, also outside. So actually, we don't know very much what it is. And I think, for me, this is a part of the interest, one of the interests I have in smart urbanism, is because it is very much a battleground. It's a battleground about authority and authorship around what smart urbanism, what smart cities should be. So because it is like that today, and it might continue for some time, and my guess is that in 3 or 4 years' time we won't talk about smart urbanism any longer. It will be passé. But my interest is like using this moment of uncertainty, because it's also a moment where we can try to shape things, to bend the understanding of what smart urbanism can be, to try to make it maybe more meaningful and possibly also useful for a progressive democratic strategy of urban development, which is what I'm interested in. What I will do, but I will be shorter than what I planned, so I might skip a series of things. First, to say a few things about how to situate. So, if I will situate myself, how I see a smart urbanism. Then expose a series of critical comments on smart urbanism as it is usually understood, and especially in the way it is promoted by large IT companies. And there I will be quite redundant with what I would say, that I like your name in French, Christine Boyer said earlier. Then I would like to say a few words, that's the third point, of how we could possibly move around the corporate-driven model of smart urbanism. And I will argue for a redefinition of smart urbanism as a knowledge-intensive form of urban development, and explain what that could actually mean, using 2 examples. Maybe I'll skip the second one, which is about mental health, but I'll try to exemplify what I mean by a knowledge-intensive smart urbanism. So, first of all, what are we talking about? How can we define something which is so debated with such variegated forms of definitions? For me, again, if we want at least to try to grasp the core of what smart urbanism is, in terms of mainstream corporate-driven smart urbanism, for me it is a data-driven, software-driven form of urban management. And in my view, and in the view of my colleagues with whom we wrote a paper last year, Smart urbanism is a set of techniques and efforts aimed at governing the city through code. So governing the city through code is, for me, what is at the center of smart urbanism. Later in my talk, I will come back to this and suggest something different, a different understanding. But let's try to stick to this idea of governing through code. I can be very quick now because I wanted to exemplify this, but having heard the previous conferences, previous talks, I think I can be very quick to explain what governing through code is. This is the intelligent, it's part of Singapore's intelligent transport system. On the one hand, on the left, you have the electronic road pricing, was introduced some time ago now in 1988, and this system automatically charges a cash card people have in their cars, and it charges different rates according to the moment of the day and levels of congestion. So you have measures of congestion and you have peak hours that influence the type of charge you will get. So of course, if it's a peak hour and if the city is already congested, you will be charged more. On the right, you have something that was introduced later in 2008, which is the parking guidance system. And this is quite classical. You have 30 displays across the city showing the availability of parking spaces in different parking lots. So you can choose and you can maximize the rationality of your mobility. So these are very simple examples of existing, so real smart urban technologies on the ground working, and they've been working for some time. And this is what I call governing through code. And it also shows how smart urbanism is very much about optimizing flows. And I was struck by the fact that what we heard today, what Alexander talked about, but you, Michael, just talked about, it's very much about that. So it's how can we optimize flows, pedestrians, cars, any kind of flow. So this kind of vision of the city as a city of flows. Second element to situate how I see smart urbanism is it's not just a set of techniques and efforts like this one. It is also global urban policy. And what I mean by that, global is always a problem because nothing is global, of course. But it's always un abus de langage, as we say in French. But it is becoming ubiquitous. There are smart cities or wannabe smart cities everywhere, more or less today. It's in Asia, in Europe, in Africa. I will come back to African smart cities in a moment. But it's also global in another way because it's, for me, I'm interested in, as I said before, policies on the move. How do one policy travel to another place? And in this, in the case of smart urbanism, it's different from that. Yeah? It's very different from, say, the urban policy of Barcelona, which has been a very successful urban policy. Strategic planning, and some of my colleagues have been looking at the travels of the Barcelona model to Buenos Aires, for instance. And in that case, you have something like a place of origin. In the case of smart urbanism, you don't have that. You have a series of very different experiments, different ways of understanding, shaping smart urbanism. So you cannot follow smart urbanism from one place to another. It's a much more complex, networked idea. It's not a model. And that's the other point. There's no such thing for me as a model of smart urbanism. What we have is that we have a series of players among all the actors interested in smart urbanism, a series of players who are interested in trying to develop a kind of fully fledged model of smart urbanism. And of course, these actors are large transnational corporations, and that's another specific aspect of smart urbanism. It is a role, and we've seen this already with Christine Boyer's talk, the role of transnational corporations is central in the development of this global urban policy. This is the first time it happens in my career.
That's because I didn't follow. I usually do that.
I wasn't aware it was so close. Okay.
Just continue.
Okay.
We'll solve the problem.
Gosh. Sorry?
I nearly did it as well.
You know it, yeah.
The phone is absolutely too close. So
Yeah, it should be here. Okay. This is just to situate, of course. Okay, one thing is away. This is how a market analysis company called Navigant Research, I'll do it like this. It's a US-based consulting agency. You have many of them around, but so take this as an approximation. But this is the way they look. They kind of situate these transnational corporations in the smart urbanism business. And as you can see, they consider that IBM in terms of execution, so making it happen, and in terms of strategy is the most important actor. Before Cisco, things we more or less intuitively know, but that can show how these companies are positioned. To take the example of IBM, this is one thing I've been looking at. It's the market of smart urban technologies already generates some $3 billion US yearly of income, and it represents currently 25% of the company's operations. So it's a major aspect of their work. IBM has also, and that's what you have on the horizontal axis, has also developed a strategy involving two things that you might know. First thing, they can sell full-scale contracting to city governments with flagship contracts in cities like Rio de Janeiro and in Singapore. The second thing they do is that they have what they call the Smarter Cities Challenge, where experts provide 100 municipalities over the world with pro bono consultancy. Of course, the idea is that this investment will yield eventually returns. And this, to complete the explanation and kind of short idea concerning their strategy, they have been investing massive amounts of money. I saw that all over the place when I was working in Singapore. They have a worldwide marketing campaign which started in 2008, and had invested by 2013 had invested $100 million in this campaign. So just to give you an idea of the importance of these companies. So what has been happening if we take the urban studies literature, which is of course a bit different from literature in computer sciences and management, is the recent rise of a critical literature concerning this mainstream form of smart urbanism, and in particular corporate-driven conception of smart urbanism. So a series of papers, books. I think one of the first was Dave Holland's paper in 2008 that had been looking at the discourse of smart urbanism, so criticizing, looking at the risks, but also at the opportunities of the discourse. And more recently, work that has been looking at smart urbanism on the ground, so making field work in cities as different as Dolera. I'll say a few words about Dolera in Gujarat, in Cape Town also, and in Philadelphia. So if we want to summarize the arguments of this critical literature, they have been insisting, I think, on these 4 points. The first point has been very present in the literature, is that the fact that smart urbanism tends to promote a technocratic form of urban governance. So governing through code rests on the idea that all aspects of cities can be, as Rob Kitchen puts it, measured and treated as technical problems which can be addressed through technical solutions. The problem, of course, is that cities are more complex than that. Cities are also political bodies, they are contested terrains. and they contain, or they are made by a series of questions and problems that of course cannot be solved by technical solutions alone, even though of course some of them can be solved by technical solutions. Second aspect, the fact that it tends to, this idea of smart urbanism tends to evacuate issues of social and economic inequality. If you look at the mainstream discourse and work on smart urbanism, questions of inequality are very rarely present, and in particular issues of unequal access to IT, the inequality of people towards computer literacy, how it is unequally distributed, is very rarely addressed. So, as Alberto Vanolo, a colleague from Torino, puts it, in the smart city there is little room for the technologically illiterate. The third form of critique in this literature since 2008 is the fact that, and this is where the kind of global vision of smart urbanism is important, is that smart urbanism tends to prioritize IT in places where there are more urgent needs. So the idea, the critique here is that the success of this very seductive smart urbanism literature and narrative, of course, puts emphasis on IT infrastructures and leads to investments in smart technologies in cities where this kind of need is by far not the most important, and where such investments are not the most urgent. Vanessa Watson, a colleague from Cape Town, recently looked at master plans in Africa. And it's extremely interesting to see how many of these very poor cities have master plans made by traveling consultants, and which are smart city plans. Of course, in cities where basic infrastructures are very often lacking. And the same can be said for the huge 100-city plan launched by Narendra Modi in India since he came to power last year. And I will come back to that. Last point is that the analyses of smart cities on the ground tend to show that smart urbanism can be a very useful justification for the eviction of the poor. This is what's happening in Dholera, Gujarat. Maybe you know that Modi, before becoming Prime Minister, was the governor of the state of Gujarat, where he launched a smart city in Dholera. Very good work has been done by my colleague Iona Datta from the University of Leeds, and she has shown what that leads to. Yeah, there's for the moment very little, but what's happening? So there's no smart city for the moment, but what's happening is land grabbing. So in the name of smart urbanism, there's a very vast dispossession of lands where farmers lose their land on the one hand and get criminalized if they try to oppose the state's smart urban projects. And it's it's dangerous to talk critically about smart urbanism in India. It has become so in the last few months. So people working on this in India are at risk. So you have out there a whole range of critique regarding both the discourse and the reality of smart urbanism. So the question is, if we look at that, what should we do now? Should we just, finish up saying, okay, we've done the work of critique, if we're not within computing, and we can, move to something else? Which I think is a move we cannot make, because as Iona Datta's work, for instance, shows, it is a performative discourse. Things are happening in the name of smart urbanism. And it's not exactly what is getting promised by corporations. So I think we need to continue to engage with smart urbanism. And actually some authors suggest that we should build on this critique, that we should add new things. So we should, make compliments and continue. Some of these authors, Caralho, for instance, who has been quite active in the literature on smart urbanism, argues that we should reconceptualize smart urbanism. It has been too narrowly conceptualized, and we should include in our discussion 6 axes. We should talk about smart economy, smart mobility, smart environment, smart people, smart living, and finally smart governance. So 6 aspects. And by doing this, we should put more emphasis, taking aboard the critique that has been leveled. We should put more emphasis on social inclusion, social capital, and sustainability. Of course, this is all very well. We can only agree with such aims. The problem is that this is just kind of a list-like framework. It's just adding more things and making a kind of wish list for smart urbanism. And I don't think this can really help us to circumvent the capacity of states and corporations to digest critique. And as Rob Kitchen puts it in a paper last year, smart city vendors such as IBM and Cisco have started to alter the discursive emphasis of some of their initiatives from being top-down, managerially focused, to stressing inclusivity and citizen empowerment. So what's actually happening is that corporate visions of smart urbanism can turn any kind of theme, I think, into indicators and data, possibly also to captures or sensors to make it amenable to software analysis. And this is exemplified in a kind of popularization of smart urbanism by IBM, this what they call the smart city or smarter planet equation, where everything can be instrumented, can be measured, data can be interconnected, and by the use of algorithm and software, we will get smart solutions for a smarter planet and a smarter city. So in this kind of cybernetic, technocratic logic, new themes can simply be added to the themes that IBM has. You've probably maybe seen that IBM's vision is a smart city is 9 pillars or 9 systems. We might get back to this in the discussion. This is getting back to urban dynamics in the 1960s, so we've been there before. So in this logic of lists, we can always add new things and see them as systems and see them through this kind of cybernetic imaginary and process. And this, so we can just add social inclusion if we like. And so this, I think, just adding new themes as some of our colleagues suggest, I think does not challenge the technocratic vision of smart urbanism, which is, of course, functional to promoting and selling smart urban technologies. So I think if we want to overcome this kind of trap of technocratic governance and overcome also this kind of technology push ethos, we have the technology and then let's make something out of it. If we want to challenge this, I think a more radical critique is needed. Of course, I don't think the critique should evacuate the role of technology. This would be absurd. I like Christine, I'm not a Luddite. I love technology, so that's not the point. But I think we should, within a redefined smart urbanism, displace the role of technology. And moving beyond this technology push posture means, I think, opening up a space for thinking new, creative, smart initiatives and strategies where technology might be enabling, but not necessarily the starting point, and where we can find solutions that can often be low-tech or no-tech, because the problem is the problem and not the technology. And this, I think, requires a redefinition of smartness as a knowledge-intensive rather than a technology-intensive vision of cities and their development. we should, as Holland says in a recent paper, start from the city and its attendant social problems rather than looking immediately to smart technology for answers. Pay attention to the immediately, which means that we might eventually come to that, but that's not the starting point. And actually, if you think about it, if you look at the etymology of smart, it's interesting because at the root of the word smart, if you follow the Oxford English Dictionary, it's a very old word. And you find it already in the 14th century. And then it has two meanings. The first is smart as something sharp, stinging and cutting. So in this sense, smart describes the properties of an object. And the other set of meanings relates to qualities of speed, intelligence, and neatness. And of course, the second meaning is the one that is invoked by the dominant smart urbanism narratives. But so we see that etymologically, smart refers to intelligence and knowledge rather than technology. So we can use that kind of argument and think about it etymology, knowing, of course, the limits of etymology to redefine smart urbanism. So, of course, this is just one step because simply arguing for a knowledge-intensive conception of smart urbanism does not lead us very far. Any city official, I think in St. Petersburg or anywhere, would say that his urban strategy is knowledge-intensive. So the problem is, what do we mean by that? And my argument is that we should I think ask three very simple questions and confront them with dominant visions of smart urbanism. The first question is the question of framing. Who frames what we need knowledge on? The second is who provides knowledge for urban development strategies? And the third is what type of knowledge is needed? So I'll take these questions in turn and I try to explain what I mean. And I think I'll just have time for one example to make this hopefully a bit more concrete. So, first question, question of framing. In mainstream smart urbanism, IT companies frame the knowledge that is needed, if you think about IBM's 9 pillars, for instance. And such framing presupposes that cities across the world can be envisioned in the same way. It's kind of discussion you raised about does it apply to Switzerland and to Central Station, New York. However, if we try to kind of enrich our ideas about smart urbanism with urban studies, in urban studies there's a very rich and interesting post-colonial literature which insists on the fact that the theories and concepts and ways of looking at cities in general is very much a European and North American tradition. So because our tools and concepts and theories were elaborated in Chicago, in Frankfurt, in Berlin, etc. So what we need, if we want to have a more global vision, a more cosmopolitan vision of urban studies, we need more place-specific, more region-specific frames and categories of analysis in order to develop relevant forms of thought and action also in cities of the global south. To take just one example, I did a lot of work on public space in Africa and Asia, and I was trying to make sense of this, looking at the different understandings of public space in Europe, which is what we usually rely on, in an African city like Ouaga in Burkina Faso, and in Asia, because I was working in Vietnam. And of course, the understandings are very different. So if you just use the kind of usual way, European way of seeing public space to try to understand what's happening in a city like Hanoi, where I've been working, and plan it, you get into trouble because you might come with very strange misunderstandings and bad decisions. So the way knowledge on cities is framed cannot therefore be left to traveling corporate consultants from IBM or the city of, say, Singapore, but should rely on independent expertise and processes of grounded knowledge production. That's my first point on these three questions. The second question is, who provides knowledge for urban development? And this is, of course, closely related to the former. In mainstream, corporate-driven smart urbanism, the answer of who provides knowledge is very simple, because it's very much a return to high modernist thinking, the rationalist city that Christine Boyer referred to. So a vision of urban knowledge, urban information also, which is exclusively an expert vision of the city, an expert also driven urban form, urban management. So I think if we want to enrich, if we want to change, if we want to look for alternative visions of smart urbanism, we need to get back to critical planning theories in the 1970s, those theories which were trying to seek alternatives to modernist, functionalist planning postures in the 60s and 70s. And one of the things I think we should return to is the kind of, I think, quite famous theory of usable knowledge by Lindblom and Cohen, which is particularly relevant, I think, in this context. This theory assumes, against the modernist idea of a unique positioning, a unique authority, a unique expertise, that knowledge production is a socially distributed competence. And he argues that we should develop usable knowledge by articulating three forms of knowledge. The first form of knowledge is lay, ordinary knowledge, the kind of knowledge we all have because we use the city on an everyday basis. The second form of knowledge we should mobilize to produce usable knowledge is, of course, expert knowledge, knowledge about mobility, about population flows, pedestrian flows, whatever. And the third knowledge is the knowledge that comes from the interaction between these two types of knowledge, so ordinary knowledge and expert knowledge. So I think we should see a knowledge-intensive smart urbanism as a combination of knowledge produced by different types of actors in dialogue. And if I have time, I would exemplify what I mean concretely by usable knowledge in a minute. So finally, what type of knowledge is needed? So another implicit assumption of mainstream smart urbanism is that there is available data, be it in national statistics, urban statistics, in the social media. We saw a lot of sources before. So data is there. We just have to mine it. That's the solution, and that's so the type of knowledge we need is there. We just have to find it. However, the problem with this is that, as we know, statistics, and the very name gives it, it's statistics, so it's the knowledge of the state, that's the data of the state, is always, when you produce statistics, it's always a question of selection, it's always a question of power. So, in fact, in contemporary urban situations, a number of initiatives show that some areas, like slums, are blank spots on our city maps, like the blank spots Bill had on his maps. We don't know anything. We lack information. We don't know don't know the layout of streets in slums in Nairobi, for instance. So we need information on critical aspects of urban life that does not exist. So data is very often not available. So now, to move and to conclude with two examples, I would like to use one example which concerns the city of the Global South, and the other one of the Global North, and I'll see if I skip or not the second one. So first I would like to refer to an interesting example, because it both contests official sources of data and it also produces alternative data and knowledge on their city. And this is a group called the Hyderabad Urban Lab, where prominent figure is a colleague of mine, a geographer called Anant Malinganti. So a few words about Hyderabad. Hyderabad is housed now for a population of 12 million. And it's also interesting because it's a city which has a 2-decade history of trying to position itself as a high-tech city. And at the same time, slum settlements have continued to grow. And in 2001, the census identified 1,600 slum locations in the metropolitan region with a lack of basic infrastructures. So what was happening is that India has been struck by the Modi fever. So we have this big plan of developing 100 smart cities. So what's happening in Hyderabad, of course, is that they try to position themselves as a smart city to, of course, grab some benefit from this national strategy. So it is in this context that the Hyderabad Urban Lab, which is a research and community action program, which is funded by the Right to the City Foundation, and it started in 2013. It is in this context that the Hyderabad Urban Lab develops its activities. I would just like to stress 2 things in their work. The first is their critique of the inconsistencies of the different spatial shapes of Hyderabad district, depending on which agency you ask and where you ask for information. So there are different shapes and forms. So of course, data are not comparable because the surface and the boundaries are different. And this leads them to conclude that as Hyderabad aspires to become a smart city, the only thing we can say with any certainty is that the first step would be cleaning up and aligning crucial data sets and making them public and transparent. So there's a situation in terms of available data, to get back to that, which of course does not sit very well with the visions of corporate smart urbanism, where data is supposed to be of good quality, is supposed to be raw and not cooked, as we saw before. So the second interesting aspect is the production of data on issues on which there is insufficient data by the Hyderabad Urban Lab. Public toilets, that's not very glamorous, but that's a basic issue for people living in the slums of Hyderabad. So what they try to do is understand where the public toilets were, because this is important for people living in the slums. So they mapped the 186 public toilets and showed that there were numerous problems of access. Here you have one. So one of the problems is access for people, for elderly people, for people with disability, also for women, questions of privacy, stuff like that. So that's one of the things, who can access it. The second thing that they showed, and this kind of moved from data production to knowledge production, is that they looked at the logic of the location. Why are public toilets where they are? And what they found out is that the revenue for these public toilets is what people pay, so the charge of people going to the toilet. But more importantly, where money comes from is it comes from advertisement spaces on the toilets. So what they showed in this small survey is that toilets are managed basically as billboards, and they are located where more money can be made from selling advertisements and not from other for other criteria. So who is in the power of producing data and deciding what data is needed are, I think, crucial questions raised by the Hyderabad Urban Lab, and questions that resonate with other forms of citizen science elsewhere. And I'm thinking here, for instance, of the data collection campaign to measure radiation after Fukushima in Japan. So focusing on knowledge, so this is, I think, a very interesting example. Now you should tell me if I should conclude here or if I move to the last part.
3 minutes if you
Okay, I'll wrap it up.
That would
Yeah, it's the second example is I wanted to talk about my work on mental health. The point is very simple, is that one might think that, of course, this is a problem of the global south. So, okay, we have bad data, we have a series of basic problems, so the kind of smart urbanism scheme does not apply there, but it applies to cities in the global north. And my point here is that on many issues, even in a data-rich and resource-rich country like Switzerland, we lack information, we lack data, and we lack knowledge. And we lack knowledge, for instance, on the relation of people with psychotic problems to the city. So that's the point. So, to wrap it up, what I would like to insist on with this presentation is first, I think, the necessity to articulate what an alternative smart urbanism could be. If you look at the literature for the moment, you have a critique of smart urbanism, I kind of try to summarize it, and then you have a series of grassroots initiatives that are celebrated, but no thorough attempt to move beyond mainstream smart urbanism. So my talk is a modest step in that direction. I think to move forward in this direction, we need to create new alliances between urban studies and urban planning. I think we can learn a lot in that respect from initiatives in the Global South, like the Hyderabad Urban Lab, where scholars and activists have to try to create data, they have to deal with massive corporate and government-led initiatives. And it is possible. I have been recently embarking in the small city where I live, much smaller than St. Petersburg, which is Neuchâtel. I've been embarking on a project for a smart city in Neuchâtel because the mayor of the city sees the traps and the problems of mainstream smart urbanism. It wants something different. So I'm actually working with computer guys, working on issues of a knowledge intensive smart urbanism and trying to figure out what this could be in the city. Of course, this is complicated because we need to face, I think, a difficult political challenge. As my friend and colleague Tariq Jazil puts it, and as I said at the beginning, smart urbanism for the moment is a rhetorical strategy. It's a battleground, and it's also a representational strategy. And it's a strategy which is extremely successful. Iola data has shown how appealing smart urbanism is for young people of the middle class in India. It's very seductive. So compared to the glitzy pictures and techno-imaginaries of mainstream smart urbanism work on mental health that I did not show, issues of public toilets, of course, are not very glamorous. Slum mapping is not very glamorous. So I think one of the important questions today is how can we produce alternative imaginaries? How can we do something interesting and appealing around issues of smart urbanism? I don't have any clear-cut answer to this, but I think this is a very important issue if we look at what's out there on smart urbanism. Finally, and I want to conclude with this, is that of course, I do not think that an alternative smart urbanism should be technology adverse. Technology has been historically at the core of smart urbanism. It is, of course, very helpful in improving the quality of life in cities, in solving problems of crowd panic and many things. But I think, and this is the point I've been trying to make, I think we should, instead of having a technology push strategy of urban management, we should strive to shape technology to put it in the service of social improvement. Technology, in other words, I think should be put in its place. Thank you very much for your attention.